So in this video, we're going to be chatting all about the experience that I had writing my first ever full-length draft of a novel. I recently just wrapped up working on the rough draft of my first romantasy novel, which I nicknamed Project the Wall. It is now officially titled Unraveling, so it has a proper title. I'll probably be referring to it as Unraveling from here on out. I've already started sort of mentioning that title here and there, but yeah, Project the Wall is now Unraveling. I just wrapped up the rough draft last week and posted my big I finished the draft vlog, which you guys were so sweet and supportive in the comments of that video. So huge thank you. I felt really loved and encouraged with the reception of that video, but I thought we would do some reflecting on sort of the entire process of creating that book, how I really felt throughout the process, things that I've learned and realized about the type of writer that I am, and just like have a real honest writing chat about how this draft sort of went and the whole experience of it. So we're gonna be getting into some details, having a little chat. If you are new here and have not heard about this project, Project the Wall, aka Unraveling, is a new adult romantasy book with sort of a dystopian vibe. It follows our main characters, Rhea and Varen, on a journey to discover this new world where there's magic and hope for them. So very dystopian journey book, really fun vibes. So it took me just about 6 months to draft this novel, and I took, for the most part, a pretty pantsing heavy strategy. Before going into the book, I had some notes, I had a lot of ideas, miscellaneous scenes, even little pieces of dialogue, but I did not have a clear scene by scene, chapter by chapter outline by any means. There was lots that I did not yet have figured out when I started writing the book, and things that I knew I was going to have to discover throughout discovery writing during the process. So that was kind of my mindset going into this. I really kicked it into high gear with NaNoWriMo in November, and that was where I really kind of started drafting this book, and then wrote 10,000 words per month every month after that, bringing us to finishing the book mid-April. First thing that I will say that kind of subverted my expectations with this writing process is I'd heard a lot of writers describe sort of a moment during drafting where they just kind of got sick of their book. They were tired of working on it. They were burnt out. They weren't interested in the story anymore. They wanted to switch projects. They thought everything they had written was terrible. And it was just sort of this low point in the drafting process where everything feels kind of desolate. And I was very, very surprised that I did not experience that at any point in the drafting process. There's a few reasons why I think that happened. I really did sort of spread out this drafting. To me, it felt like a pretty slow and steady process. And every time I was getting a little bit sick of working on it or just felt tapped out, I would take a break. I would take a week off and return to it the following weekend. And I was by no means writing every day. So because of that, I think that helped me to not really get sick of the project, because every time I was feeling even slightly disinterested, I would just take a break until I was excited to work on it again. And thankfully, that motivation very naturally came back after a couple days or a week away from the project. That being said, I would not be shocked if I experienced that sort of burnt out, this sucks, I hate everything about this book feeling during revision, because I'll be reading it a lot more. I'll be spending a lot more time with the project. I'll be looking at it on a really granular level, and I could totally see myself getting sick of it or bored with it during the revising process. That didn't really happen with drafting just because it was fresh and new the whole time. And I also think the fact that I was discovery writing and coming up with a lot of the ideas as I was going, it kept it fresh for me because there was always new layers to explore, a later scene that I was looking forward to that I had recently discovered, instead of knowing everything and kind of spoiling it for myself before I even got started with the project. On a very almost contradictory opposite note, in some ways I wish I had written this book faster. I kind of wish I had fast drafted it. I feel that way for a few reasons. I honestly think I would have felt a lot more accomplished and like I had done something huge if I had fast drafted. Because I spread it out over so many months, it never really felt very grueling or intense. It kind of felt like, oh, I'll write a chapter here, a chapter there, like very leisurely. The process felt extremely leisurely. And because of that, I don't really think it registered to me that I was writing a 75,000 word manuscript. The ending word count was like a little bit over 74K, almost 75,000 words. I don't think it ever processed that that's how much I was writing because it was so spread out. So I think I would have felt a little bit more accomplished upon completing the draft if I had actually done it a little bit quicker, maybe in 2 or 3 months instead of 6 months. So I think in the future, honestly, I might try to fast draft. That being said, I know I have to give myself grace given the fact that I was working a full-time job throughout the entire process of writing this book, as well as making YouTube videos and such. So I didn't quite have the time to fast draft. But that being said, I think I could have kicked it into high gear. I definitely could have maintained my NaNoWriMo pace. I think 20,000 1,000 words in a month would have been doable, and I could have finished this book in like 3.5 months if I had stuck with that sort of pace. So yeah, I think in the future I will be craving fast drafting, and I could see myself, when I am eventually able to dedicate more full-time hours to writing, being a fast drafter and wanting to do drafts in like these crazy sprints where I'm really immersed in the project. Something else that I noticed that I think was kind of a detriment of drafting on the slower side was that I kind of lacked that cause and effect feeling in my draft. Because I was writing scenes somewhat separately and not really in a fluid way, I really lacked that sense of cause and effect, that sense of processing what had happened in a previous chapter. Something really dramatic could have happened to the main character in chapter 25, and then I start off chapter 26 as if nothing's happened because I'm so focused on what needs to happen in chapter 26, and it's been like a week since I wrote chapter 25. So I'm not really thinking what is the immediate aftermath emotionally of what happened in chapter 25. These are random chapter names, but you get what I mean. I feel like the book in its current stance probably lacks quite a bit of flow and a lot of that slower processing sort of prose in it because I was writing it in sort of a choppy way. So it's probably going to feel a little bit choppy when I do the reread, and that's something that I'll have to work on in a revision, is kind of tying the storyline together so the characters are constantly being affected by the things that have happened previously. There were quite a few things that I did with this book that happened extremely naturally, but that I've now realized might be my sort of writing style or like my writing process, which was really interesting to discover. And I'm honestly so grateful that I did not force a ton of outlining or a ton of structure into my process right at the beginning, because having that flexibility allowed me to very naturally discover what I was drawn to do in terms of writing, like the writing process that happened so naturally without thought, and that now I can implement a little bit more intentionally, knowing that that is kind of how writing works with my brain. So I mentioned that I'm a little bit of a pantser, right? But something that I did have in mind at the beginning, even though I didn't realize, I didn't think of it in these terms, was my midpoint and a sort of final destination. It probably helps also that this is a journey book, so having a final destination was very clear. I didn't know exactly how the ending would play out, but I at least knew that they were heading to this location. So that could serve as a guiding point and like something for me to move towards. Even though at the time I didn't realize, oh, this is my midpoint, oh, this is my, you know, climax destination, whatever. Having those landmarks really helped me to give structure as I was pantsing. And I think that is key to pantsing successfully, is that I had checkpoints in mind so I knew where I needed to be going. I knew the direction we had to be heading in, and I wasn't just aimlessly like floating around in like a very soupy middle of the book, because I knew, okay, these are the checkpoints, you know, this is where we need to be heading towards at all times. And again, I think the fact that this is a journey book helped a lot with that, because it made it a lot easier for there to be a very clear path. They're moving towards one big thing. Like, it's very obvious, the flow. And I'm really grateful actually that my first novel was a journey book, because it made that so clear for me. Even though I will say now I'm craving to write a non-journey book, because there were parts of the journey book structure that I didn't love. But I'm really grateful that that was my first project. I think it was like kind of the perfect first book, because the structure was kind of already naturally built into the type of book that it was. Something else that also really helped me to stay on track was having parts. Again, not something that I was intending to help me, but it just kind of naturally fell into place this way. As I drafted the book, I sort of naturally broke the book into 3 parts based on the 3 locations that they're in. And I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to keep those parts in the final book. I'm actually sort of leaning towards no, just because they're so unbalanced. Part 2 is by far the longest, and I'm not sure that they're really adding anything to be there. But in terms of how I thought about the project, it really helped me to have that sense of structure. Although the parts don't perfectly align with 3-act structure, they sort of are similar. They sort of fall in a similar spot to the 3-act structure. So I think it helped me to have a bit of a skeleton as I was working through the project, to think about it in these sorts of chunks. And I think that's something I'm going to do in the future, even just for myself, when I'm maybe outlining or brainstorming for a project, is create sort of chunks or sections based on something, whether that's a location, whether it is the 3-act structure, just to give myself that skeleton. And again, what I found so interesting is that none of these things arose from me saying, okay, I need to have a midpoint. Okay, I need to have a skeleton structure. These things all happened so naturally. These ideas just sort of kind of came to me during drafting, which was really cool to experience. I also sort of naturally fell into being a headlights writer, which is essentially when, as you're writing a chapter, you can't see the entire story in front of you, but you have headlights. You can maybe see what needs to happen in the next few chapters. So what I ended up doing as I was drafting is I would write say chapter 24, and at the end I would know what needed to happen in chapter 25, 26, 27. So I would be able to write a few sentence synopsis of what needed to happen in each of those chapters already in the Scrivener document within the chapter it needed to go into. And therefore, when I got to that chapter, I already clearly knew things that I wanted to include, what needed to happen in that chapter, and I wasn't faced with a blank page. And that was super valuable to me, especially in the second half of the book when I did a little bit more of an outlining exercise. You guys saw my Pantser Tries Plotting vlog. I kind of had my ideas for the second half of the book, so I did a bit of an outline with like post-it notes, and that helped me a lot because I had those little short synopses for each chapter. And I think it's important to note here that I didn't have those ideas when I started the book, which is part of the reason why I thought a full book outline wasn't exactly what I needed. I had to discover some of those ideas, but once I had, then I could create a structure for myself and make the whole pantsing process a little bit easier and less free-for-all-esque. Something very cool that happened with this process is I feel like I built trust with my relationship with ideas. You've probably heard me saying throughout this video, oh, it just kind of came to me, it happened naturally, blah, blah, blah. And when people ask, you know, how did the idea for this book come to you? How did you come up with it? It honestly doesn't feel like I came up with it. It feels like it was kind of given to me. It feels like these ideas just came to me, entered into my head, and then it was my job to furiously write them down. If you guys don't know, I went to film school in college and I had to write a lot of short films. And I remember at the time, it felt so grueling trying to come up with an idea. It felt impossible. It felt like I was wrestling with ideas, trying to get one that would work. And none of it felt natural. It never felt intuitive. It never felt like they had just fallen into my head in the same way that this book has. The only very positive experience I would say I had with coming up with an idea in school was my senior year, the script that I'm most proud of and that came out the best. I decided, you know what, I'm done with this sort of wrestling with ideas approach. I'm clearly forcing it, and that is not a creative mindset to be in. So I did a little meditation. I tried to release all of that stress and expectation, released the idea of the script having to be good and all of the anxiety that came with that, let go of all of it. Tried to put myself in a really lighthearted, not too serious mindset. And then I just scrolled on Pinterest and I looked at images and I started getting ideas and writing down everything and anything that came to me, even if it didn't end up making it into the final script. I honestly think that if you are overthinking things because you're trying to make the book good, you might honestly shoot yourself in the foot. I don't think that the brainstorming and the ideation time is the time to worry about the book being good, to be so honest. You can worry about that when you're revising and cleaning it up. In the initial stages, at least for me, it was so important to have a very light approach and let the ideas just come to me naturally. I don't think I believed before I started this book that I'm the type of person that ideas just come to me. I was really closed off to that concept because it wasn't something that I had really experienced. But once the initial seed of the idea planted itself, I started getting ideas for the book really naturally. And I was also a little bit worried, okay, maybe this is a fluke. Maybe this one project I'm gonna get natural ideas for, but then it's never gonna happen again. But then I started getting ideas for the sequel. And then I got this random idea at work the other day for like a paranormal book. Ideas are flowing and they're coming to me consistently. I think it's honestly because I'm working those creative muscles and opened up to those ideas. Yeah, it's been really cool that with this entire project, it's never felt like I've had to force ideas into fruition. They've all come to me at different times, but they came when I needed them, and they, like I said, don't really even feel like my ideas, which has honestly helped me to remove my ego a little bit from the writing process, which has been huge. Because I think it's easy when you feel like you're coming up with ideas to be self-criticizing the entire time, to worry if the ideas are good enough. But when it kind of feels like the ideas are being presented to you and given to you, it no longer becomes so personal. It's like, this is the idea that came to me. This is how it felt like it was supposed to come out in the book. I'm just like the vessel for the ideas to materialize, you know? And I know that's kind of a spiritual way to look at creativity, and a lot of people might think that's a little crazy, but I very much align with Elizabeth Gilbert's ideas in Big Magic, where she talks about ideas as sort of their own things that decide to work with you and kind of come to you to execute them. And that's really how it's felt with this book. And I think that's helped me to not feel so insecure about it, because there are certain things in this book that just feel like facts to me now and feel like they are how they're supposed to be, if that makes sense. And that's not to say that I'm going to be closed-minded when it comes to feedback or revising, but there are certain things, for example, names of characters or locations or certain facts about the world, that just feel like right, and they feel factual. And I think that it honestly is because they feel like they kind of clicked into place, like they kind of came to me and that was just how the book was supposed to be. So that's been a really cool experience, and I hope that my relationship with ideas can continue to feel this intuitive and in flow. I have no doubt there will be points in my writing career and writing journey where that isn't happening so naturally and I do have to think a little bit more logically or do more solid brainstorming, but it has been cool to see that at least with this first project, a lot of the core ideas were able to come to me in such an organic fashion and to just feel like genuinely like inspiration striking, you know? Something that I definitely want to make sure I do going forward is give myself sort of that empty time where it's just kind of me on my own, because that tends to be when the ideas come, you know? It's when I'm getting ready for bed and not really thinking about anything, or I'm doing dishes, I'm in the car. When I'm just sort of daydreaming about my story is when those ideas tend to come. So I want to make sure I keep creating that time for myself. If I'm on my phone or watching a YouTube video or just distracted in some way, I'm really not receptive to ideas, you know? I'm not open-minded, I'm not ready for inspiration to strike. It's really opened my eyes to the fact that in order to have like sort of a healthy creative flow, I think that's something that I need, is to stay sort of open to ideas and not be constantly distracted. So that's been really interesting to kind of learn my perspective and relationship with ideas, inspiration, creative process. And again, maybe my tune will change during revision when I discover some element of the magic system that I haven't figured out and I can't crack it, you know, my feelings might change. But at least for the drafting process, I was really pleasantly surprised on how well my relationship with creativity felt. And that's also kind of reaffirmed me that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. There is no doubt in my mind that this project is exactly what I'm supposed to be writing right now, and that I'm supposed to be writing this book, which feels really cool to feel like this idea was meant for me. It was meant for me to write right now, and to just have it feel so right in my life right now and so like true to me and all of that. And it takes a lot of my doubts and insecurities out of the equation, which is great. Something that I was really pleasantly surprised by during this writing process was how I felt about having the Pinterest board and the music playlist for this book. So I originally created those things because I wanted to do a video on trying different ways to get in the zone for my writing project. If I had known then how much I was going to love having those things, like I so underestimated it. And it's silly because I knew that with that screenplay I talked about in college, the Pinterest board was what got me into the world. It's what spurred the ideas. So I should have known that I would love that, but my thought process was just like, I already have the book in mind. What use is it going to be to have a playlist or a Pinterest board? And honestly, I can't say that those things were huge in terms of giving me ideas, but what they provided that I wasn't anticipating was just helping me romanticize this book, helping me to daydream about the project, to get excited to work on it. That has been the biggest upside of having these things. It's just made me more excited about the book, and that makes me want to work on it. It makes me want to finish it. It's also been a really nice way to like sort of communicate the vibe of the book to my audience, sharing those things, sharing images from the Pinterest board to give you a vibe and a feel since you guys have nothing to read or latch onto yet. That's been really cool. Having the Pinterest images is going to be very helpful when I end up doing marketing, because people love little reels that are like aesthetic and include your mood board for your book. Yeah, I just think that's going to be part of my process going forward, probably a lot earlier in the process, honestly. So I did discover what I would describe as some crutch habits during writing this book, sort of some weaknesses in my own drafting process. And I don't think that any of these are like rare necessarily. I feel like they're pretty common. The first one was that I was using a lot of overly formal language and I had some wordiness issues. I've always known that I'm a bit of a run-on sentence girl. I feel like teachers would tell me this. I used a lot of commas. I was very wordy when I wrote. And I think in my brain, wordiness kind of equates with sophisticated prose, or like formal language kind of correlates with good writing. Because I think as a child, you feel like it's a flex when you can write a long sentence that has a lot more words than what your peers are writing. I know that sounds insane, but I think there's a certain realization that I had of like, sometimes simplicity is very powerful. And so I think something I'm gonna do a lot during revision is cutting down sentences, simplifying them, removing unnecessary words or phrases just to make them a little more clean and concise. And that can actually feel like a lot prettier or more sophisticated of writing sometimes than just ambling on, making your sentences longer so that they sound fancy, you know? And obviously this isn't conscious, but it's something I really started noticing. Also in terms of the formal language, yeah, something I noticed is that my main character, who has no reason to be speaking more formally than a normal person, would use ought instead of should, or would say I suppose instead of like I guess, you know? And I think that was a roadblock I had to work through, where I thought that more formal writing made the writing better, but that's not true. It would be a lot better if the character sounded realistic based on her background and who she is. That being said, one of the characters that's basically a prince may actually speak a bit more formally, and it would be a lot more interesting to show that differentiation between the characters by having him speak a little more formally and having the main character be like, why does he talk like this? So that's been something I've realized and that I'll need to really sort of polish in revision. Another thing that I've noticed is repetitive descriptions. And I think this is such a common issue, specifically with body language and physical attributes. I found myself repeating the same little phrases. And I know this is very common. This is where a lot of people fall into crutch words. There's only so many ways that you can really describe body language, and it's really easy to kind of depend on one or two go-to descriptions that you like, but it can be very glaring and repetitive as a reader when the same description is always being used. I feel like this is the easiest if I give an example. So Jennifer Barnes in the Inheritance Games series, every time she describes a kiss, she loves using the description that it's like fire. That's her go-to description. And once you notice that, it sticks out a lot. Another example, I just read a book where the jaw was like the main way that they would show emotion. So jaw feathering, jaw tightening, a muscle in his jaw jumped. Like, they were big on the jaw descriptions, which I like jaw descriptions because to me it's somewhat new. I have only started seeing them more recently. But I think the key here is diversifying. You know, there's nothing wrong with using a smirk as long as you don't always use a smirk. Same thing with the jaw things. So something that I'm gonna pay attention to in revision is just diversifying those descriptions. I think I might need to get like one of those, I know they make like thesauruses for writers. I'm sure there's like a body language thesaurus that I could get. I also want to look through some of my books and maybe jot down different body language descriptors that I like. I don't know why I feel so weird about that. I'm like, it feels like copying to me to like steal a small body language description, but I need to get it through my head that it's definitely not. Thousands, millions of writers are using the same little phrases of like a jaw jumping or scrunching of the nose. Like, that is not what copying writing is. That's just familiarizing myself with sort of the standard ways of describing facial expressions. And we're all naturally doing that anyway. There's absolutely certain descriptions that have cemented in my brain from reading books. So there's no, you know, harm, no foul in looking at some references. I guess sort of the last thing that sticks out to me is that I just noticed some things that don't come naturally to me to write. Biggest one that comes to mind is descriptions of locations. I struggled so much with giving atmosphere of what a location looks like, especially when it came to describing like terrain. Very difficult to me. I asked my friends so many questions like, would this type of tree be near this sort of environment? Yeah, that type of stuff just does not click naturally in my brain, and I've never been good at like geography or anything like that. So that was a big question mark to me, and still kind of is. I need to like figure that out. I mean, my friends have tried to reassure me that most readers, that's not going to stick out to them unless it's like totally unrealistic, especially since it is a fantasy world. But camping terminology, how to start a fire, like the most random things that I wouldn't have even thought about going into writing a book that I suddenly needed to know. Definitely going to my friends was a great resource. I did, you know, some internet searches on random things. You'll be shocked by the random information and details you suddenly need to know in order to write a book. And I do think the camping stuff and some of the locations was exacerbated by the fact that this was a journey book and they were traipsing through the continent. And honestly, that makes me excited to write a pure urban setting book in the future, or like a book with a familiar territory, because I'm like, oh my god. Trying to describe terrain of a fantasy world is so hard. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing some of my thoughts and reflections on the drafting process. Can't believe I can say that I've officially finished drafting my first book. And honestly, this whole process just has me all the more excited for my next draft. I'm honestly still in the mood to keep drafting. I'm like, let's get started on this sequel. I'm not actually gonna do that right now, but I kind of wish that I could. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, comment down below. Writing a book is freaking hard. I love that. Yeah, comment that in the comments if you made it all the way to the end. All right, I'll see you guys next week with another one. Happy writing.